Welcome to LabOPEX Live. We are getting ready to kick off season 2 of LabOPEX Live. If you missed season 1, you missed a treat. And last week we had a season 1 roundup. And so I'd invite you to either go back on LinkedIn, wherever you're listening from, Facebook or YouTube, to watch it. And on YouTube, the channel is Lona LabOPEX Leaders. And so today I'm really excited. We have Dr. Steffini Stalos kicking off season 2 of LabOPEX Live. Welcome,
Hi,
Dr.
everybody. We're wearing our red because we are going to make unsexy regulations more sexy.
Okay, guys, come on. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you're coming in from. You cannot miss today. Today, we're going to talk about CLIA Director's Guidance to Avoiding Regulatory Nightmares. So we're still going to have fun talking about regulatory nightmares. So come on in. If you're a CLIA director, if you're a consultant, if you're a manager doing operations and you're working on labs, private labs, or just regular labs, come on in. Tell us who you are. Hi, Rosalie. Thanks for joining. Rosalie's joining from Facebook. Come on in and tell us who you are and where you're coming in from. We're going to jump in. Hi, Courtney. Courtney's coming in from Facebook also. Nice having you. Hey, Courtney. Nice having you. So we're going to actually jump in. And Angela, hi.
Hi, Angela.
Okay, West Virginia. So we're going to start by asking Dr. Stalos to tell us a little bit about, her background, why she chose to go into medicine and why she chose to specialize in pathology, and then now choosing to be a independent consultant as a CLIA director.
Absolutely. Thank you first for having me on, Lona. And the reason that I went into medicine in the first place is as a child, I overcame a difficult condition. Of course, not by myself, through the help of many fine physicians, nurses, and many staff. And after that point in time, I wanted to help other people combat their illnesses. Mm-hmm. And so I went through life and it got to the point where I was going to decide on what type of specialty to go into. I had thought about going into surgery because I know there's a lot of procedures. So, I like using my hands, technical skills. But the honest truth is I didn't see myself in the long run wanting to have the stamina of standing and doing long surgeries. And then also there is a bit of a boys club going on in surgery. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. So I thought about what other fields are there where I could have access to procedural type of activities and have the longevity with the career. And, pathology was a good fit for that. And my business called Blood Associates was born about 11 years ago in a very similar economy to now, even though the reason is different. My business, right before I went into business for myself, I just graduated from my transfusion medicine fellowship. I went to work for a blood center, and then the economy of 2008 hit, and it was very rocky. And just like now, people had to make choices, not get elective surgeries, and then that caused a downstream effect on the healthcare system and blood centers, layoffs. And then I was freed into the wild, which is kind of a scary feeling.
Mhm.
And so I was in Rhode Island. I came back to Dallas where my family is, and I just started networking. I wasn't really sure. I didn't think, this is a perfect opportunity to go into business. But I networked. Actually very quickly into this healthcare incubator, and there I was helping them do vetting of executive summaries. And just helping them with a scientific advisory board. And then I started kind of getting a feel for what it would take to have one's own business. And so I just kind of slowly grew into that, which leads me to answer your question about the independent, director. So because I'm board certified in pathology and lab medicine, I am able to serve as a CLIA lab director and some of the other CLIA roles. And I tend to do that in an independent contracted way, as opposed to the other option, which is to work full time. And I don't know, I just found a niche for myself. And then for the past 11 years, I've been doing that. And it has evolved into also, unfortunately, well, depends how you look at it. Sometimes turnaround is needed. And so I'm not always the CLIA lab director of note. I am there kind of like MacGyver or something, if anyone remembers that show, and I just dated myself there. So, figuring out why a lab is getting ready to lose its CLIA license, which is a hard stop on earning money, because a lab without a CLIA license cannot bill. So that's a Titanic right there. Or if they're getting ready to lose their accreditation, which by itself will not cease the operations, but they could lose in-network status with some of the third-party payers, and it can also trigger a CLIA inspection, which then starts, the losing of the license. So I've had a lot of opportunity to be, I guess, in the hot seat and have to be right about what it, it's not possible to right every wrong, but be righting enough wrongs to turn the lab around for the regulatory barrier to be lifted. So there's a lot of creativity. I cannot stress enough. I know we're very science oriented and detail oriented, but I have to pull from creative juices, I guess. And also, after having my own business for 11 years, I it's just a sense after a while where the barriers might be.
Right. Awesome. So everyone, we are talking to Dr. Steffini Stalos. She is a pathologist and a CLIA director, independent contracting, and she's evolving. Her career has evolved and she's evolving. She's finding herself fixing labs, and as opposed moving into consultancy, not so much as you would see a physician consulting patient, but she's consulting in labs and identify when they have problems, help them. But a lot of times, I suppose over the years of working with labs, you have developed all this knowledge and wisdom, so you can pick out whenever there are problems. You have seen a lot of problems over the years. So guys, come on in, and Dr. Stalos is going to tell us about some of the challenges that she has encountered in different labs. If you're coming in, just tell us who you are and where you're coming in from. So, Dr. Stalos, just want to for you to tell the audience a little bit about some of those examples of things that you have seen that are risky, like risky situations that you have seen in labs over the years. And I know a lot of us can learn from this.
Absolutely. And before I kind of get into the risky situations, I just wanted to remember to talk about like an overarching message. So if I start rambling on and lose somebody, I think there are just a few messages to glean from this discussion we're having, that we're sharing here. And that is the lab is a part of medicine, and therefore it's going to be held to the medical standard of care. And how do we achieve that? And that's what we're going to be talking about here, or at least evidences of where it wasn't held up. I mean, the lab is under the same goal as any other branch of medicine to deliver on a standard of care. And so I think we need to know what those mechanisms are. And that includes regulations. And secondly, I want to simplify as much as I can regulations, because I know when you just say regulations, it's like, you know, the brain turns off. There's only really two kinds of regulations, and it doesn't matter what CLIA, COLA, CAP, who we're talking about. The regulations deal with either who is responsible for performing a certain function in the lab, or what is needed to ensure accuracy and precision of that particular analyte. That's where regulations go. It's I think people try to get this glassy-eyed thing when they talk about regulations, and it's, you know, 42 CFR 493-1445, and that's fine. I know that that's the lab director's responsibilities on CLIA, but really it's really only those two things. And so sometimes human nature is that when we can't see something and we don't understand something, the tendency is to minimize that something. And that's why we're here today talking about many of the issues affecting labs. And so on that note, I have some notes here just so I don't lose track of what I'm saying. But and you and I actually talked about this, Lona. So one of the risky situations I see is for any company, which includes a lab, even though it's a medical company, the highest expense that a company usually makes is the payroll expense. And so sometimes labs that are doing pretty well generating tests, they are doing so well, they want to have a second lab generating the same sets of tests, or maybe some complementary tests. But the risky situation they sometimes do there is they try to utilize the same personnel. And it's very hard to use personnel in lab A 8 to 5 and then the same in lab B 8 to 5. And CLIA doesn't buy that, by the way. So that's one of the risky situations I've been in and have prevented from happening, you know, when I was there. Another one, okay, so I got to be careful when I talk about this, because, you know, there are many cross-functional groups within a lab. Of course, we have the essential CLIA personnel, which are in a high complexity lab. That's the lab director, clinical consultant, technical supervisor, general supervisor, and testing person. Sometimes if you're a much larger organization, you might say technical director, section director. You might have multiples of each of these five if there's a high complexity. And then there's going to be the business parts of the lab. And I will say, if we think of the lab as like a human body, where you got the brain and you got the different organs, and then you have the blood coursing through the body, bringing resources to the organs, I would say sales is like the blood force of the lab or of the body, because it's, you know, bringing in the revenue and creating the resources for all the parts to do what they need to do. But the sales is not the brain of the body, it's the blood of the body. And why I say that is sometimes I've seen sales forces be overly influential in how the lab workflow will happen. They will either try to dictate the test menu. They don't know anything about tests or how they're generated. They can sometimes not train and I'm talking a lot here, as you probably can tell, about reference labs. There are labs that are separated from where the collection happens. So this is going to be the bulk of my knowledge, but please pipe in with, you know, physician office labs or hospital labs. You know, there's different lab verticals. So going back to the sales. So if a salesperson brings in specimens into the lab, they have to train the client how those specimens are going to be coming into the lab. You're going to be, going to be using this tube, and you're going to be sending it, in these packages. And for these kinds of specimens, it's this, and those kind of specimens is that. You fill out the requisition, has to fill out the requisition, cannot test without the requisition. I know we know that, but you'd be surprised how when you're not, when the client has not been trained, how many bad specimens can come in the lab, and the lab has no choice but to not run those. I know that there is another choice, that is to run them and just do without the information or whatever was didn't meet the acceptance criteria. But that itself has got a lot of labs in trouble, and people. I mean, that's a pre-analytic process. It's not like I don't know how this happened. That's the first thing you see. There's no way you couldn't have seen that. So that has been a risky situation. I've also seen, talking about toxicology, LCMS, MS labs, where sometimes the tendency to want to stand up a new toxicology lab, the powers that be try to find, I guess, the cheapest people. And that is a very tricky kind of lab. It's not something that's easy to learn as you're doing it. So I have been present when people have been brought in that they didn't send out any kind of messages that they're going to be able to handle it. So I've been around, and then they don't stand up, and there's a lot of expense in getting equipment. I mean, the LCMS MS machine, getting the reagents, and then doing all the validation work, and not being able to stand up the lab. That's costly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of people not coordinating, or not even understand how to coordinate things, because in the first scenario where they're introducing either new tests or new workflow, or taking in something new, and not preparing the workforce either to understand how this should be prepared, how the requisition should be done, how to store, how to transport, how to process. But it's more about how can we get more tests in here, and not thinking about the downstream effect. And then the next thing you're talking about is toxicology. Okay, how can we get more money, because toxicology is a big deal, but not thinking about what kind of personnel do we need to run a toxicology lab. It's like when you're thinking about high complexity, what type of personnel do you need for those things? The disconnect is there. It's more like what you're saying is like when people start focusing so much on the sale or the revenue and not making those connections, it can be really, really scary. And I know you have several more. Let's see what our guests are saying.
Yes, let's see.
Audience. Angela is saying, appreciative to have support of lab profession and lab professionals by pathologists of lab medicine. Yes, Dr. Stalos, she's complimenting you being here. Kristen is saying hello. I'm tuning in from, is that Oklahoma? OKC?
Oklahoma City, yeah.
Yeah. And Leon is saying, how responsible should a lab director be for billing compliance? If not, what is the best way to structure? We probably will answer that a little after you're done with that list. And we have Dennis Strank here.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Dr. Stalos. I've been looking forward to this day all day. Thanks, Dennis. Ollie Brian, indeed, the lab is very crucial in terms of disease prognosis and management. And Anthony saying, hi, Lona and Dr. Stalos. It's great to be here.
Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Anthony. Hi, everyone. So right now, Dr. Stalos is kind of giving us some broad examples of some of the risky situations that over the years she has seen in labs, and we're kind of in the middle of the list. and we just went through two. So I just wanted to stop to say hi to the audience, and we're going to continue.
Okay. So I just have a few more kind of risky situations. And that is when talking about, not knowing what kind of personnel to bring into a lab. I think also there's a difficulty when a person who's trying to stand up a lab, him or herself, doesn't come from a lab background, because you have to think, where did it start from? Okay, let's say there's a lab owner, but they don't come from a lab background. And then they're going to choose the personnel: lab director, clinical consultant, technical supervisor, chemical supervisor, testing person. So you can start to see where does it start? And that will be one of the solutions I will kind of mention at the end. And then lastly, and this is a responsibility of lab directors. I know that the regulations say that a lab director just has to be available. They can be on site, telephone, a variety of ways, email. But there is a boundary, I think, to that, because I've seen where lab directors do not visit the lab. If you don't visit the lab at all, I think bad things are going to happen.
I can imagine.
That's my list.
Yes. Okay, Patty saying good evening and great topic. So yeah, I mean that's really some risky, and I think later on we'll probably talk about solutions. But when I think about it, it's almost like you're already seeing the root cause just by listening to this list of challenges. You already start seeing that there's some root cause that can be identified that's really would bring some of these real risks to lab. And the thing about it is that you have some people that's going to suffer, right?
Yes.
Some people will get away with it.
Yes. And I've heard members in your audience say it, so I'll just say it again. A clinical lab is just not like another business. In medicine, there's this, small room for error. And I say this on my LinkedIn profile, that the clinical lab is very vital to healthcare because we're early on in the diagnostic process, and we influence 60 to 70% of medical management decisions. And we do it early on in the process. The reason I'm mentioning early on is because if something goes wrong there, many downstream things are affected. And so there needs to be a lot of love and care put into the lab, and it needs to be held to this standard of care. Some labs have a lot of trouble achieving and maintaining standard of care, and I think this is perhaps unknown to some of the public.
Right. So for other CLIA directors, maybe someone that probably don't have 11 years experience in that field, or maybe just coming on, or maybe it's somebody that's a consultant that's, because I've spoken to different consultants, they have called me and they're like, I'm supposed to be helping with this lab and these are my responsibilities. So what would be some of those red flags that you would warn them if they see, to kind of step back if they're seeing these red flags that could result in a regulatory nightmare?
Yes. So I actually at first had a difficulty distinguishing risky situation from red flag because they kind of go together. But I did put together a few things here. And I think these will make just common sense. Rapid turnover of personnel in the lab. And with respect to the lab director, this is a soft criteria that regulatory bodies use. They don't come in and say, oh, I see this happen. That's a deficiency. But the lab director should not change more than once every 2 years. That will probably get some laughter from some of the independent reference labs out there, because sometimes that position changes a lot. And But in any case, that's a red flag. Because, and why is that? It's a First of all, it's a financial red flag. It says any organization, when you hire somebody and you lose that somebody, you have now lost 3 to 5 times that person's salary. Why? Because do you know how hard it is to find another person, train that person? Because it's like this. While the person's being trained, someone else has to come and train them. The productivity of both goes down in order to bring that person up to speed. And so it is just devastating to a clinical lab to have that be going on again. And I'm probably talking about smaller independent reference labs that have only one person in any of the 5 positions, or maybe several positions being filled by several people. Another, and this has actually happened to me. I'm just telling you stuff that's not made up. Okay, this is not made up.
You've seen it all.
Yeah, I mean, I do have I say that because I'm a creative person, but this is not evidence of that. The owner of the lab has been hidden. That shouldn't be hidden.
They don't tell you who owned the lab.
When you ask, they won't tell you. They'll say their representative is blah blah blah. That is code for, if you knew what the name of the owner was, there would be that's a red flag right there. You know. So, and I learned that the hard way. Mm-hmm. Of course, I was very suspicious when I wasn't going to be told who the owner was. Mm-hmm. I think I've seen a lot of shady, but at least they tell me their names, made up names. I don't know. And I mentioned this before, red flag, wanting to use the same people in that one lab to staff a second lab. Mm-hmm. That would be a red flag. Another red flag is wanting to stand up a new lab remotely. Mm-hmm. Wanting to if an owner,
could you
remotely, like remote validation.
Oh,
I don't take those labs, but that's been up on there. And let me say something here. I know that for lab director and some of the other personnel, you don't have to be on site all the time, and some remote oversight is possible. But there are some things COLA has put their foot down on what they will allow remotely, and they do not allow remote validation. So just want to get that out there. Another red flag is if, John Jones, the owner of a lab, has been involved in a previous lab court case. That's obvious red flag. Not permitting the lab director to come on site. Yes, that happens. Another one is thinking that the quality management system, quality assurance, what have you, that it is the responsibility of one person and all the other people can do what they want to do. That's a red flag. And that's the end of my red flags.
Yeah, especially those remote validation and the fact that you cannot go in the lab. I'd want to see what lab I'm responsible for, to see what's going on. When the first thing is observation, walk through for almost anything. That will give you so much information, so much data. And for people to try to get you from entering the lab, that is hopefully an obvious red flag.
That's obvious. And I don't know if it's a distance thing or what have you for the lab director to not come in. Maybe they're a little intimidated. But as I'm talking about here, Lone, and as you've mentioned, we're not looking for the one missed quality control that invalidated us. Said I'm not talking about at that level. I'm just saying, are there people there? Their equipment's there. Is there specimens coming through? Are there, is there a churning? Just
a lab.
You can see that.
Is this a real lab?
Exactly.
How responsible should a lab director be for billing compliance? If not, what is the best way to structure oversight?
So, Dr. Friesen, thank you so much for the question. This is probably one of the few times I've been asked this question, and I'm going to get to answering, but it is difficult for me to answer because the duties for a CLIA lab director, as defined by the 42 CFR 493-1445, does not put the billing under the lab director. But my guess is the reason you're asking, and that I've been asked just recently before, never before that, is that if a lab enters into some type of court case, is convicted of fraud, saying, oh, you guys are committing fraud, the tendency of the prosecution is to hold the lab owner responsible, because the lab director, I have my hands full, in case you haven't understood that. So I don't go into what was the billing code applied to this test, and did we get reimbursed? Did we accidentally unbundle when we shouldn't have, or bundled when we shouldn't have, or did another billing, a second billing? I have not gotten into that, but I have seen now some lab director job descriptions where they're asking for the lab director to be involved in billing compliance. And I suspect that is because the lab owners do not want to take responsibility for that. I mean, I'm just making a guess here. So, I mean, I myself am starting to, get involved in getting some training on some of the common lab compliance issues with billing, but I wouldn't say I or many other lab directors would be very, could fill in as a billing compliance person.
Yeah, that sounds more operational than technical. But I suppose it's good to know, right?
Yes.
It's nice to know.
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Friesen again, what are the big risks that COVID testing brings?
Yes. Wow, that's a big question.
A lot of
yeah. Yes. Okay. So this is a very big question. I want to be careful how I answer it, because at the end of the day, okay, let me just, because I know first of all, for any test, much less COVID, there are different ways to arrive at an A answer for whether someone has the analyte in question. And we can have waived systems, we can have moderate complexity, we can have high complexity. So we have, for instance, for a waived, we can have the rapid antigen card, and then for moderate and high complexity tends to be high complexity for PCR. But I think the biggest risk is not using the proper algorithm to determine what you should say the person, whether to have that person be labeled as having COVID or not. And so what do I mean? So what do I mean is when you are giving a test to a person, especially in the case of an infectious disease, you need to use the test in collaboration with the pre-test probability of them even having COVID in the first place. What is pre-test probability? The probability of them having the disease, given the kinds of symptoms that they are showing. They've been hanging out with a COVID positive crowd. They have all the COVID positive symptoms. You are just coming in at the end and giving them some COVID test. It could be anyone, the wave to the high complexity. And it's a clinician that has to, the risk is they have to weigh what the test says against the pre-test probability. If the test is negative, and the person they're seeing has every behavior and sign of having COVID, then that clinician needs to know to reflex to a more sensitive test, in this case PCR. So I think that is, and that's actually the CDC algorithm. And I don't know if every lab is doing this, but there needs to, you can't be blindly dependent on a test. You have to use that pre-test probability. And then also, what are risks? and during COVID, there were a large number of waived labs that grew because people who normally didn't do lab testing were now trying to bring COVID testing in-house to save their own staff and to help the community. Well, not everybody knows how to operate a lab, even a wave lab. I'm going to tell you right now, some physicians have their hands full just with a wave lab. And imagine now they want to bring in, if they want to bring in, and it's been asked of me, they want to bring in a higher complexity test. A high complexity test, I don't think so. So when you say the big risk that COVID testing brings, those are just some of them. And I'll just say this as a brief response to what we are all feeling, but I think there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be added to the laboratory response network, which is a system of public and private labs in the United States that are supposed to protect us from biologic and chemical agents. I think there needs to be a lot done there, and I just leave it at that.
Sounds good to me.
Lona, my battery's getting ready to die, so I'm just gonna pop over and get something here.
Let's say hi to a few people. And I have so Angela is saying definitely turnover is a red flag and costly with reduced productivity. Chessie, I'm going to get your question once Dr. Stalos come back. Good afternoon, great topic coming from Leesville. I'm going to get Dr. Vona. Dr. Voma, what are CLIA regulatory requirements for mobile labs?
Oh, good question. And these are coming up more and more often, people getting involved in mobile labs. So as far as getting a CLIA license for a mobile lab, and by the way, getting a CLIA license is using a form called the CMS 116. If you just type that into Google, CMS 116, you'll see the form come up. And you have to go through the name of the lab, how many lab tests you're going to do, where the location of the lab is. And oh, by the way, are you going to be a mobile lab? So you don't have like a fixed location. And then you can mark that on the CMS 116. So it's pretty easy as far as getting the CLIA license, which is something, I don't know if you have that graphic handy, Lona, the one that kind of looks like this.
Yes. Let's see if we can get that up. Kind of forgot about that. Is it on your computer? Let's see, share. I'm gonna have to put it up.
That's okay. It's not that. I was just going to share that this. Well, I guess if you can see, this is what your CLIA license would look like. I've blacked out some of the areas. And the reason I'm jumping topic, but coming back to you, Dr. Boma, is the lab director is called lots of stuff. But if you want to know, are you the lab director?
She's a CLIA director.
Yeah, so because there's going to be technical directors, section directors. They're still under CLIA. But if you're not sure if you're the lab director, you look at this. If your name is where the name goes for the lab director, then you are the CLIA lab director. So I just say that because there's lots of different names people give, director of lab services, hospital lab director, director of lab operations. Those are not the lab director. The only person that's on here is the CLIA lab director. But anyway, getting back to you, Dr. Boma, now that's one part of the equation. Other part of the equation is you must know what your test menu is going to be in order to answer the other part of what regulatory requirements are there. Because are you going to use the wave test, the rapid antigen card? Are you going to be using PCR? You need to know what complexity your test menu is, because then from there you'll know what kind of people need to be hired and all those kinds of things. And CLIA breaks it down into non-waived, that means the moderate and high complexity requirements, and then the waived requirements. So that will, and that's under 42 CFR 493.
Yeah, I was trying to pull this up, but I'm having some challenges. But I'm thinking Dr. Voma would have seen that. But I like that expert would have seen that, because once you're accredited, you're given that certificate, right?
Yes. Another part I wanted to show on here, I know this is kind of I blacked out a lot of things, but there was the name of the lab, the name of the lab director, the CLIA ID, and the dates that CLIA ID is useful for. Well, down here at the bottom, and in a real CLIA license, sorry, over here, it'd be like another flap. Everybody knows what I mean, because I'm speaking to the choir here. But those are going to be the tests that you're capable of doing and billing for. If you're billing for something that's not on there, then you can't do that. So this paper is very important.
It is. Let's see. Patty is saying a lab direct. Yes, as a lab director, my organization expects me to be in charge of billing compliance. So you're administrative director, right? I'm not sure. Patty, could you put that in? Are you a CLIA director or
But are you on? Is she on the CLIA license? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, Patty, are you on the license as the CLIA director? And are you doing dual role as a CLIA director and also operational or administrative director? Okay. Angela's saying, what are your thoughts about change of directorship if you don't close out a CLIA and open a new one under a new director? Does the new director assume all the responsibility and risk of the prior director?
That is a great question. So since I don't work for CLIA, there's probably some kind of a grace period between the new one coming in and the old one going out. The requirement for an incoming lab director is to have read and signed off on all the standard operating procedures within 30 days. That's according to CLIA. So, I mean, you have 30 days even into, so I think that my thought process there is that there's like a 30-day grace period. And I would say no, but I say this with a caveat that the new director would not assume the responsibility and risks of the prior director, because what I do when I come into a lab is, besides signing the SOPs in 30 days, is, I get to work on evaluating the workflow or looking at anything. Once the equipment been maintained, or how the proficiency tests been going, how the QC been looking, and I start documenting that. So I document that, and so I'm showing that I'm looking over the lab, and sometimes I have discovered things that were under the prior director. And that's a dicey game, especially if you're about to enter into your inspection period, which of course this happened to me. So I had to weigh decisions like I got to get after it. And I would just say what I thought was responsible. Previous, administration it appeared they didn't handle these things, or these things were left unhandled, or these things were remaining. But we all know what regulations say. It's what is written that was done. So if I, the lab director, wrote down that I saw it and this and this and that, then theoretically by that, that I should be absolved of that.
Yeah, that they said it was done, so you're not they said it was done by them. So, and it was written by them that it was done. So you won't be responsible for it not being done. Is that as a new director?
Yeah, I'm saying if I create a progress note that's saying I'm coming in here as lab director, I'm looking at different things. Oh, I noticed it wasn't done, and here I'm going to take care of it. This has actually happened with proficiency testing, where I wasn't sure what had happened, and we are about to enter into an inspection period. And of course, they didn't pass the previous proficiency testing under the other lab director. And we all know you're supposed to have documentation of what to happen. And so I wrote a big old note on that. I know about it. I wasn't here, but I know about it. And here's what we're going to do.
Right. Sounds good. So Patty was in our moderate complexes lab, and she was also director of operation for the main lab.
Okay.
So I think she had some dual
roles. Yeah.
CLIA director for clinic, director of ops for main hospital that is high complexity. All right. So we have one last question. We always never end without solution or ideas for solution. We're not here just complaining.
No pickle juice. No pickle juice.
Steffini started something.
I love that term. It's so cute.
So what ideas could you give us about preventing some of these regulatory risks? Just ideas, and maybe the audience could help us with ideas.
Yeah, I would love to have you read some of the audience's ideas, and then I'll just say a few here. And since I've been experiencing these things for 11 years, I can't, I'm sure the regulatory bodies see things happen again and again. You know, tox labs did this, and now molecular labs are about to do the same thing, I'm sure. So it's not identifying the little nitty gritties. I think a much overarching thing, message or solution is that the regulatory body is in a position to figure out how lab owners could be better vetted, especially if they come from, if the lab owner comes from an area that's not lab. I think they can probably create some way where there is better education of the lab owner, because these things are going to keep happening and happening unless that element changes. Another thing is, and no one should ever enter into any business, much less a clinical lab business, without an executive summary, which is a shortened version of a business plan. Do not do that. I don't know why people, I have asked this question every time. May I see your executive summary? And you would have thought I'd ask them for their social security number. I don't know what's going on. And I've had to create it for them so they see. It's not scary, but you need to have one. Another thing is, and I think we're all behind this, is we need to humanize the lab. The lab is just not this robotic thing that is somehow, you know, getting the lab test results that the patients need in order to get the kind of care they need. So humanizing the lab and creating transparency in the lab so that the lab is a much more visible force for healthcare. Those are my solutions.
Yeah, I like that. Making sure that you, because now I'm learning a lot from you about a lot of the reference lab, and you know, the seem as if there's a disconnect with the owners and what's really needed. So that education piece, I think, is really important for owners to really understand that how serious lab testing is when it comes to connected to patient care. And
yeah,
you know, if you're sending out results that's not reliable because of the system that you set up as an owner, the risk, if they, understand what lab is, it's not only a business. Of course it is a business, but it's not only a business. So that education, I think, is really vital. And
something I want to add on top of that, Lona, if I might, because in a regular business that is not attached to healthcare, mistakes, a certain amount of mistakes are allowed. But in medicine, theoretically, mistakes are not allowed. And so business people who only have business backgrounds, they will have difficulty with comprehending that, and they might not want to go the 9th mile or so. I know that, you know, I'm speaking to the choir here, but that's where there's this big disconnect between things that I recommend and then things people might not feel is cost conscious, or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Camille McKay. Let's see. Where is that? I agree. Education of both lab owner and lab directors and fellows who will become directors. Yes. I suppose different kind of education, because it's more an awareness for the directors to know what to expect, how to combat some of those challenges when they see them. And, thanks so much, even like, today, I think this is really important what Dr. Stalos is doing, bringing awareness. So this is some form of education, especially for new directors. Dr. Voma is saying, how about lab directors assisting clinicians to troubleshoot discrepant results?
I love that question. Another question from Dr. Boma. And on my LinkedIn profile, I talk about a physician to physician consult on this very thing, because there's a large growth in the direct to consumer, the DTC market, where anybody off the street can come into certain kinds of labs, order whatever, Ebola, yellow fever, doesn't matter, you haven't been traveling or anything. And that, to be honest, intimidates the providers, because they don't know they don't know how to interpret these tests to those patients. And we don't even have to talk about exotic tests. On my LinkedIn profile, I'll talk about where a physician was discussing with me, and I shared that with you, Lona, a potassium that was outside the normal range, and that lab specimen was not hemolyzed. Mm-hmm. But in any case, the physician had to send that patient with the high potassium to the ER to get all the workup and everything. Of course, everything was normal. Of course, that potassium was normal. But then we don't know, because I wasn't involved with that lab. That's a excellent opportunity for whoever that lab director is to correct them, because how many other potassiums is that happening to? And this is potassium. Mm-hmm. This is not the big fancy, right, molecular tests. And this is where I want to, because I know this is going to go on YouTube. Having a big fancy sexy molecular menu, that is great. There's lots of great minds out there, but if you cannot perform tests correctly, having these kinds of tests is not going to help anybody. It's the performance, it's the quality of the test. It's not the type of test that should be telling you how great a lab is. It's how well they're performing the test. And it could be potassium, something as simple as potassium.
And some of those tests may not, you could probably find an alternative test that may even be cheaper, although it's maybe like, oh, it's fancy, and, some of these genetic tests and esoteric tests that may not even be necessary, when there is a lab director that can review these orders and talk to the physicians. And like you're saying, patients coming in with their own requests, to be able to interpret and I think there's a major gap right here for lab, when it comes to lab medicine, working with physicians in this sense, because a lot of times physicians don't know how to, that's not what they were trained to do at that level, to interpret some of these lab tests. So for a pathologist who is a physician talking to another physician about lab medicine, helping to interpret, or even another CLIA director at that level, I think there's a major gap right there and an opportunity right there. Thanks so much, Dr. Voma. I haven't seen you much on LinkedIn for a while. Angela is saying, hospital administration must also comprehend their highly regulatory compliance requirement for lab requiring high quality lab professionals. I know we have been going for a while, and I know you guys may have a lot more questions for Dr. Stalos. Sorry, I didn't quite. Siri think I'm talking to.
Oh no.
So you can always connect with her on LinkedIn, continue the conversation. Oh, right there. I didn't even see that. That's what she said, connect you on LinkedIn.
That's
You
right.
know,
I'll be looking.
subconscious. I was saying it and didn't realize it was right in my face. I clicked on it. I'm ready to answer that question. So yes, go ahead and connect with Dr. Stalos on LinkedIn. Continue this conversation. Really, really interesting and important conversation today. Thank you, guests. Thanks for your engagement. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your comments. And Dr. Stalos, thank you so much for such an important to start. This is kind of the beginning of this conversation. We could go on, never know. We may, later down in the season, continue with this discussion.
Love it.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you as well, Lona.
All right, guys. Every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we have LabOPEX Live, where we have a very great guest coming on to talk about topics that's related to lab medicine. We're bringing a lot of visibility to the lab and what we do. So don't encourage on LinkedIn, we're Facebook, and we're on YouTube. So see you next week. Have a good one.